Good morning, adventurers. My name is Ben, and welcome to a morning show where I sit around, drink some tea, and talk about D&D. It's still very hot. First up, today for T&D, we have this here Disaster Squad mug that my party, or members of my party, made for me. I love it very much. All of the little things on there are little places that are in the world that they've visited one way or another, which kind of plays into what we're talking about today, which is part of the reason that I chose it. And inside of it, I have a tea that I don't know that I've actually had on the show before because it got buried in the back corner of my tea cabinet. It is Soothing Caramel Bedtime from Yogi. This is a very interesting one because it is very much kind of... It's like a spice tea almost more than anything else, but it is like a... It's not like a chai, it's more like a herbal bedtime kind of thing. Like it tastes spicy in the way that a chai tastes spicy, but it is more bedtimey. It's a little bit like richer almost in a very specific way because of the caramel, but it's very good. And I had forgotten that I had it, and it got buried way deep, and so I was very excited to get to see it and find it, and then break it out for this, I guess. So anyway, not really the point. What we're talking about today is we are talking about world building within settings. This is something that patrons, you guys, my patrons suggested we talk about on this show. So really, there were two separate suggestions. It was world building within a homebrew setting and world building within a existing setting, and I'm just going to kind of combine those for a certain degree. Obviously, I will do more world building as like a homebrew kind of thing at some point here because that is a massive, expansive topic. But I do think that people can get stuck in a homebrew world in the same way that they feel stuck in a pre-written setting. And so I want to talk a little bit about building either within an existing setting or taking something that you have built and you love a lot and continuing to build on it from there. So let's talk about that. So really, it sort of comes down for me to not feeling constrained by what exists, but also wanting to make sure that you are keeping it in mind when you're continuing to do things. So what do I mean by that? I mean, if you have something like Ravenloft, super popular, arguably the most popular other than Forgotten Realms, 5th edition setting. Curse of Strahd is widely regarded as the best D&D module, up to interpretation, of course, but it is widely regarded as the best 5th edition module. It's set in Ravenloft, its own little world, in like its own little bubble, honestly, even. And so they give you a lot of stuff to work with, but what do you do when you're like, man, I want to make this feel a little bit more personalized? Well, you take what they have given you and you look at it and you go, okay, what can I adjust a little bit here without changing what's going on? What can I add in here without changing what's going on? And what can I change entirely without really adjusting what's going on too much? And you'll find that there's a lot more in a written world that you can work with and figure out. And it's not necessarily something that is going to be, this all-encompassing, ironclad sort of environment that you find yourself in. There's a lot of room for flexibility, even if it's just renaming the tavern, adding an NPC, adding something in that forest over there, like adding an old woman in a hut or something like that. Just little things like that you can do to really change the way that things feel. And that is a really sort of cool way to be able to adjust things to fit your party better. Because so often, and the thing that I feel the most constrained with regard to modules, is the fact that they are written without characters in mind. They are written before characters have ever even been conceived of, right? The characters don't exist, and so they are written in such a way that it could be a port for any character, which means that if you run a module straight out of the book, you're not going to have any sort of character buy-in. And that's totally fine for some campaigns, but in a campaign that like I run, I really want there to be a lot of character buy-in. I want there to be a lot of like dig in, backstory kind of moments from characters. And I know a lot of people also want that. And so if you are somebody who is looking for that, but you are not wanting to ground up build a campaign and you want to run a module, then just add a few things here and there to make your campaign fit your characters a little bit better with regard to their backstory. And honestly, the same thing goes for a homebrew world. And you might be saying, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Why would it be like that? When I do world building, I go top down instead of bottom up for the most part, which means that I go ahead and I sketch out the big picture first, and then I flesh it out going downwards, as opposed to starting with a seed and then going upwards from there. I do a little bit of both, but for the most part, I am a top-down kind of person. I had a world map for this campaign right here before we even started the session. I had a continent map for this campaign right here before we even started the session. So it helps me sort of inform some of the things that I'm going to be doing to have that map, and so I want to be able to go ahead and make that. But in doing that, what you end up doing is you give yourself a set of parameters to work within, and that can be constricting when later on, I don't know, 3 years down the line, you're like, man, I really want to have something else going on here, but my players have explored all of this area, and I can't just be like upturning everything on them. And you're probably right. I mean, without some sort of cataclysmic world-ending event, there's not going to be like major topography changes and all this other crazy stuff that goes on. And so from there, you find the little things that you can change, the little things you can add, maybe the things that weren't there before, maybe the things they just missed before, to make that land feel a little bit more alive. Because the other thing with a top-down, which is a kind of how modules work, which is why it's kind of ironic that I don't love modules, it gives you an overview and a little bit of depth to it, but there is so much more depth past that that you can work with. And so all you have to do is find where that depth actually is. It's not going to be in the highly detailed schematic of the city, maybe. There's always depth in a city, for the record. But if they've given you a lot of detail in the city, it's the surrounding areas. It's the woods outside. It's the fields outside. It's the people right down the road that are doing some weird thing in their basement. There's room for that depth. You just have to pick the spot that you want it to be more than anything else. And I keep using the word depth kind of intentionally here because it sort of plays into the way that I have gone about building continuously for this 3-year-long campaign. And that is to literally just go deeper sometimes. As I mentioned, I had a continent map drawn up. It was going to be the entire world map. I didn't know if it was going to be a one-shot, a month-long campaign, or if we were going to actually play a game for a while. And again, now here we are 3 years later, getting ready to wrap the campaign, maybe in this calendar year. Not too super positive. But so I sketched up this map. I had basic ideas of all of these cities that I sort of scattered around, all these settlements. A couple of quick sentences knowing where things were so that they could place themselves in the world, and then we could work from there. Just kind of help inform character choices and stuff like that. And so I handed them all that in their binder that I gave them at the beginning of the game. And so that is the map that they have had. They are locked into that map. And I could have said, hey guys, we're changing the map a little bit, let's work on this. But I didn't want to do that because I liked the world. I liked where it was. I liked what was in it. But because I had done it so quickly and I wasn't sure if it was going to be a long-term game or not, I just kind of threw it together, really, ultimately. I fleshed out the places that I thought we were going to run into in the one-shot or first few sessions of the game that we were going to be playing. But otherwise, it was just like names and sentences on the page. And so when I saw that this was going to become something more, I went ahead and I fleshed out the rest of it because I like to play sandboxy kind of games where they can kind of go all over the place if they want to and see whatever they want to see. And so I sort of solidified this continent very quickly, very early on in the campaign, before I had plotted out specific things that were going to be happening. I had the general plot line in mind, but I didn't know this is where they're going to be going, this is where they're going to find these things. And then I ran into a problem at some point, and I was like, oh man, where do I put, what can I do here? And I went, I don't need to reinvent the wheel here. I just need to go downwards, because everything on the surface is boring usually, but if you go down where things can be buried, that's more exciting. And so that's my long-winded way of saying literally just go underground sometimes. But dungeons, sewer systems leading to old cities, cities built on top of cities. I have an underground mountain that was hollowed out, is an ancient dwarven city that has been abandoned. It's filled with ghosts. There was a dragon summoning ritual there. My players literally just formed what are effectively magical nuclear weapons to wear on their bodies. It's a great time. Just being able to go, yep, you went underground, and suddenly there's all this crazy stuff that's down there because it wasn't sustainable for it to exist above ground, and so it fell into ruin, and just sort of like stuff was built on top of it. That's super cool. And in the same vein, but on the flip side of that, you can also just go up. There's so much in D&D that is based on the ground that people get scared the first time they see anything flying. Anything in the air is terrifying the first time. The first many times, quite honestly. And that's not wrong, necessarily. I mean, if we look up, there's not a whole lot going on above us except for maybe some big buildings, depending on where you live. Birds, airplanes, helicopter, that kind of thing. So there's not a whole lot above you, which is why if you start building upwards, then you're going to have a really interesting effect because it becomes this very alien kind of thing going on in the air. I've wanted to talk about this for a while because I had this idea a ways back, but they just now got to it. They just now found it, and it's one of my favorite things about this world that I have created. In this world, there is a thing that is up. It is called the ley word. It is the convergence of ley lines into a doorway. The gods used to use it to get to and from different planes very quickly. In the ley word, it's like this long rainbowy kind of bridge with different paths branching out of it, sort of like a neural network out to all of these different planes and the portals to those planes. And it rockets across the sky, following the ley lines, just sort of like bouncing around, making its way kind of all over the planet. And so no one would ever think to look up. No one looks up. There's never a time when people are just like staring at the sky, unless you're in like New York City or something and you want to look up to look at all the cool buildings. People just don't look up. And so placing something up in the air has a actual tangible alien feel to it. They discussed for a very long time what they were going to do, because they figured out eventually that they had to go up to it. And they were like, okay, so do we like walk underneath it and then fly up to it? Do we try to just get on something and fly to it? Like, how are we going to go about making our way to this thing that's in the air? When if it was underground, they would just like walk up to it, dig down, they would find a tunnel, they'd walk down it. Very straightforward options. And really, the flying options are very straightforward too. But the fact that it was in the air was this like alien sort of concept to them. And I'm sure I'll talk about the ley word more at some point, but like, it's just a good example of like, there are invisible things too that you can just throw into your world. This is not something that you can see. This is something that is attuned to planar energy. You have to go through all these steps to be able to find it, which they did. But it was in the air, and it was invisible, and it was rocketing around. You can put these highly magical, highly just impressive things in your world, almost in plain sight, and people don't see them. They don't interact with them. They have no idea that they're there because they're highly magical and they have the ability to do that. I have a magic shop in my world that is, I built it, I placed it in a city, and then I went, it needs to be bigger than it is, but it doesn't make sense for that. So it's like a TARDIS magic shop. It's just way bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. It is a very narrow, very small storefront. You walk in and it's like 4 stories high, grand entryways and all that. It's really, really fun because every time they go in, they're like, oh, right, it's the big one on the inside. And I think that that's fun. So you can take the little nooks and crannies of your world and you can blow them way out of proportion and create these really amazing things in those areas. It can be things like, oh, this building is bigger on the inside, it's magical, it's all this crazy stuff. You can bury a mountain and have an ancient civilization in there. You can bury a city under another city. You can put this gateway bridge to all of the different planes rocketing in the air if you want to. It's up to you. genuinely. And it's just fun. It's fun to play with those kind of things because we don't get them in real life. What we get in real life is we get buildings, we get roads, we get politics, we get social things going on. We get carnivals, which are fun to be able to play out. We get like concerts and stuff, which are also fun to be able to play out. But what we don't get is we don't get buried treasure. We don't get secret doors. We don't get, all the things that make D&D cool. So if you're looking to world build within an existing setting or within a setting that you created and you feel locked into, find the corners, find the nooks and crannies, and add cool stuff to it. Just make it so that every inch that somebody looks at is worth looking at. And that is genuinely some of the best advice I can give. In the same vein, don't spend so much time putting detail into things that you're then going to be, hyper disappointed when they roll 8s on their perception check and they don't get to see everything. Maybe you have a list off to the side where it's like, okay, if they get above a 15 on any perception check here, there is going to be, boom, that was a bad snap, boom, magic door, just in the room, because why not? Put those things in there. Just reckless abandon, throw them in there, because eventually you will be able to sort of like tickle the part of their brain that wants to engage with that third tier of D&D that is so often neglected as the game goes on in exploration. Because there's always going to be something cool for them to find around the corner in your world, regardless of if it is your world or an existing world. So, wrapping up, the pinnacle piece of advice that I have for you: fill the corners with cool stuff. Always make the corners interesting. Always make the tiny cracks and crevices very, very interesting, because if you do, you will be paid back tenfold in it, because they will be blown away by the way that it exists at all. I promise. So that is everything I have to talk to you guys about on that. Getting into the shows that we have today and this weekend, because it's Friday. First up, today, we've got Mayhem D&D, Off the Rails, Oxventure, Just Roll With It, The Strings of Fate, Rolling with Difficulty, World of Low, The Crown DM, and Coming Together Naturally. Tomorrow, we've got Dice Funk and Strange Hungers. And then Sunday, we've got Super Idols, Roll for Your Life, Grinning Griffin, Dungeon Drunks, Library of Nightmares, The Chaos Brigade, Rise of the Forsaken, Chromatic Dice, The Stradcast, High Rollers, and Tabletop Notch. Go check them out. Let them know that I sent you, because again, someday somebody's going to say something to me about it, and it's going to be funny. I promise. But that is everything I have to talk to you guys about today. So, thank you so much for making me part of your morning routine. I really do appreciate it. And thank you so much in particular to my patrons. You guys are the ones that make this show possible. Quite literally, this one that I'm in right now, you are the ones that made this show possible. So thank you so much for your submissions. Thank you so much for your suggestions. I truly do appreciate them. So, yep, that's it. Dismount time. With all that said, guys, don't forget, drink tea, play D&D, and keep on rolling.